No problem, sorry, late.
No worries. Thank you. All right. Chair Brzezinski, would you like to take roll, or are we okay with knowing that everyone in the committee is currently present?
So we are recording, I'm assuming at this point, from what I can see.
Yes.
Based on that, I don't think we need to go through a roll call.
Okay. Thank you. Then if you all have taken a look at the agenda, what I have on the agenda for today is a review of the draft report, getting some feedback from you all on what the report looks like and things you may be interested in editing or changing, and then talking about next steps for publishing the report and getting it submitted to the legislature. If it's all right with everyone, I will just dive into my review of the report. Really quick intro for Emma, who you can all see here. She has recently joined the asset forfeiture team here on CJC staff, and she has put together a lot of these tables and done a lot of work in this report. I am just taking a lot of credit for it and walking through it today, so I wanted to point that out.
I want to say thank you, Emma.
Yes.
So I am going to share my screen here with our draft of the report, and I apologize in advance. I am a little bit under the weather, and so I may have to liberally use my mute button to sneeze, cough, things like that. While I'm sharing this screen, I have a little bit of trouble seeing you all, so please just jump in and speak if you have questions or anything like that, because I don't think I'll see raised hands or anything like that. Okay, so this is going to look in format fairly similar to years previous reports, but I will just point out most of the things that have been changed or added to the report. And we can discuss it as we go through, or we can just kind of run through this and then chat about stuff at the end and go back to different sections. So this is just a list of our committee membership and then staff at CJC. The first piece here really is the executive summary, which I think we can kind of come back to at the end. It really just summarizes the rest of the report. So the first place that we made some changes is in our background and methodology. If you all recall, the background and methodology used to be separate sections. They were pretty lengthy, and I think they had some good information, but maybe not as up-to-date as we wanted it to be. So we removed a little bit of some specific language around some older statute changes that made changes to the way the asset forfeiture was done. And I summarized some of that and then just made this really focused on the main statutes that authorize and describe reporting requirements for state asset forfeiture, and just took that down a little bit, and then also gave a good description of the reporting process for agencies, how they report to CJC, and sort of the timeline for reporting. So basically, I condensed this and tried to make it a little bit more general and relevant to someone who might just be reading this report from the outside and want to know how reporting works. So yeah, these next couple of paragraphs here, I don't know if you can see when I highlight on here. Hopefully you can. So these, great, thank you. So these two paragraphs here are really pertaining to a decrease in the number of seizures we've seen pretty significantly in the last 2 years. So last year's report addressed this as well. And so this is the same language. Ooh, I'm having trouble highlighting. This first short paragraph here is the same language that you all approved essentially in the last year's report. And it just mentions that there were some case law and statutory changes that changed the way asset forfeiture has been performed in the state. In addition to that, we as staff thought that it was important to mention some of the changes made in this most recent legislative session around drug possession and drug delivery charges. And so we took a stab at some language to sort of mention that, note what happened, and note that most of our seizures, almost all of our seizures reported to us are drug related, and they may stem from these drug delivery and possession charges. And we don't have a specific, we don't have a specific measure of like the relationship between those two things, but it could very well be something that provides some good context for what we see moving forward and what we may have seen in the last 2 years as far as number of seizures. So this is a particular point where I do want you all to sort of read through this, give us some feedback. Is this maybe too presumptive to put this in here and say that this may just be notable, or is it important to provide some data around this if we're going to mention it? How do you all feel about this being in here? And
So I'll jump in, and
yeah,
and
please.
I think it is important to note, and I think it will likely impact forfeitures going forward. The fact that will be criminalized again does impact the search and seizure issues, and so therefore there's the possibility of forfeitures happening from traffic interdictions, and is kind of back on the table. Well, my concern is, and maybe the data supports this from what we've seen from the way that agencies report it, but often stem from drug delivery or possession charges, and typically it should be more from the commercial stuff from drug delivery, not necessarily simple possession type charges. And so I'm wondering if it would be a better to just say drug related charges rather than calling it out specifically as delivery or possession, unless our historic data is the agencies are reporting it as possession charges. Then I guess that's what the data says.
Okay, you're correct that we don't have necessarily specific data that say it's possession charges. So we are perfectly happy to change that to drug-related charges. And Emma will make a note of that so we can make that change.
Yeah. Let's talk about this a little bit more, because I think we can flesh this out a little bit more than what it is, because 4002 does, I think, 2 parts. One, the user amount, and I think Elijah, what you're referring to is the Boyd Hubble. And I think we should maybe put something in there that would actually say specifically with the intent to deliver the legislation that talks, about Boyd Hubble, and maybe even put that in there. I think that's where we're going to key, and it gives us a focus for next year to see what, if anything, materializes from that.
Okay. Yep, we can absolutely do that. And I think what we can do is we'll be working on any and all changes that you all want to make to this draft over the next weeks. But for this specific paragraph, because we really want to get this smithed correctly, I'll probably send this out with some changes and see if you, just in an email, if you all could look it over and let me know if I've captured properly what you all would like it to say.
Sounds great.
Okay, thank you. We can come back to this too if we end up wanting to talk about it more, but I'm going to move to the next pieces of the report. And then this final paragraph here just mentions that we do have a dashboard, and actually we are planning on rebuilding this dashboard. It's going to contain a little bit more information than it has in the past. We don't have it rebuilt at this time, but we will have it rebuilt before this report is published. And when we all come back together and or over email if necessary, you all approve the report, you will also be taking a look at that dashboard at the same time. It will reflect the same information. It's just more formatting and being able to update it online. So we can talk about that a little bit more later too. So as we move into our seizure section here, there was once again a large drop in the number of reported seizures. We only had 26 seizures reported for 2023. All but one of these were drug related, which is pretty common. They're almost always all drug related. And they only totaled about $350,000 worth of assets seized. Marijuana was the most commonly associated drug, followed closely by fentanyl. That's new. We've seen it 1 or 2 cases in the past, but 7 cases is higher than we have in years prior. And then the majority of cases were a result of a search warrant, and others were search incident to arrest or probable cause search. Super common. This is what we typically see. This is a new subsection of the report. So in 2022, you all, the committee, approved a change to our form that began including some demographics questions for folks who are subject to asset forfeiture. So this is the first year that we will have a full calendar year. CJC staff implemented that report and started having agencies fill it out on January 1st, 2023. So we have a full year of demographic information. So all those seizures, those 26 seizures that were reported, have demographic information. Because there are often multiple individuals involved in asset forfeiture incident, there are more individuals listed here than there are seizures. So I would say about half our cases had more than one individual. Some of them, I think we had up to 5 individuals included in one incident. So there's really a larger number of people here. This is the way that we sort of made our first attempt at what it would look like to put demographics in the report. And we are very open to doing something a little bit differently if you all think that's the way to go. We also don't really have over time data for demographics yet, right? Because we only have the 1 full year of data. So that's something we could maybe add in the future. But for now, we just really summarized those pieces we have, which are gender, race, ethnicity, and age information. The majority of individuals subject to search and seizure were male, the majority were white, and about half of them were Hispanic. None of that is really shocking. I think that half Hispanic is higher than we would expect, right? Because half of our population in Oregon is not Hispanic, but the rest of these numbers are not particularly interesting. Asian individuals is a little bit high, although I will say, just because there are so few seizures and we really looked through every single case, one of those seizures that had multiple individuals included multiple Asian individuals. So that may be a little bit of a fluke due to one particular case. For age, we just gave a distribution here, and it really looks like most folks are 20 to 29, sort of younger, and then from 30 to 60 plus, it's about even, right? And very, very few individuals under 20. How do you all feel about how this is presented, given that this is sort of the first year we have this information, we can't do anything over time, but do you think that this reasonably represents the amount of data we have available?
I do. I mean, based on what we have, I mean, I think this is as you've said, this is the first of the reporting. And as we get more years under us or behind us, we'll be able to then start doing some cross checks, maybe.
Yeah, I think it could be valuable in the future to look year over year at how some of this changes. And this demographic information, oh, please go ahead.
I mean, the only thing I would throw out to the group is whether or not we want to put what the demographics are for the state by race. You know, I don't think it's necessary for this particular one, but it may be something maybe we should go ahead and include, knowing that we're going to start populating those fields broader in the future. But I'm fine with what we have now for the first year. Thoughts, anyone?
You know, if I can, when you first look at it, it's a little confusing having a total down at the bottom, because clearly, you know, that whole line above does not reach 47. You have to do the subset. So I'm, you know, just the eye gets confused. The other is, you know, when I first looked at this, what's the difference between race and ethnicity? You know, I'm trying to remember tax forms and every other government form if it breaks that kind of stuff out that way. And it just kind of jumped out at me as, wondering why it isn't all just race or all, ethnicity.
Yeah. I can answer that for you.
Okay.
So we, when we made these forms, when staff put these forms together and brought them to the committee, we decided to follow what the census does, and that is ask the race and ethnicity questions separately. So I think to Senator Brzezinski's point, if we do want to compare to the census at some point, it is helpful to have the categories in this, asked in the questions asked in the same way. So we do, because we asked both of these questions, we do have essentially a crosstab of race and ethnicity. So it's a little bit, we worried a little bit about suppressing data that might identify individuals. And so we're still thinking through how to do that on the dashboard. But we did look at that race and ethnicity crosstab, and as is very common with other data sets that we work with, white is typically chosen for folks who identify as Hispanic. And so in, say, our DOC data set, right, Hispanic is just included in the race category. And I think a lot of those individuals in this situation would be selecting white and Hispanic. And so this is really reflective of how the census asks the questions, so that we're able to make that comparison later on if we would like to. We can also do the crosstab of race and ethnicity and do what we typically do with data sets that come in like this, that staff, research staff do, which is assign everyone who selects white and Hispanic to Hispanic and give an overall race and ethnicity variable. That is possible to do as well. We just went with this because it's sort of it's the most direct or clear according to what was recorded, but it is not unheard of. It's very common for us to take a race and an ethnicity variable, make that assignment of Hispanic to those folks who select white and Hispanic, and then create a combined variable. That is certainly not out of the question. What our concern was, particularly for this set, and it's such a small set of data. In the future, if we have 300 seizures and maybe 400 individuals recorded, it would be a different situation. But for example, we have one individual, only one, who selected Native American and Hispanic. So one of those 22 Hispanic folks is the same person as that Native American person. And for the sake of not too closely identifying folks in this way, especially people who may not even have criminal charges against them. This may be a civil case, right? And certainly have not been convicted of anything. We just want to be a little bit careful about suppressing those types of cases. But we're open to, if you all would like to do sort of a crosstab or a race ethnicity combined variable, we could certainly suppress certain data points, but keep percentages and things to describe what's going on in that way, instead of these broken down two different variables. Yeah. That's possible.
Let me just ask though, because my understanding from what you just said, Catherine, is that basically we're following what the census has already set up. My understanding is that the breakout of white and then Hispanic versus non-Hispanic is the assimilation of the Hispanic culture into the white culture, and that there's more similarities, I guess I'm going to say, and as compared to other races. And that's what I thought was part of the rationale that the census had used, is based on, in our culture, Hispanic is more assimilated into white as compared to others. I mean, I'm just going back to a lawsuit that I worked on back in the 70s, and that was part of the argument that plaintiffs made as to whether it should be determined based on white versus black or black versus non-black. because of the assimilation?
Well, I think the issue, Senator, is actually more complex than that too, because there are a number of people who identify as Black, Hispanic, people from like Caribbean in backgrounds, and as Catherine pointed out, somebody who identifies as Native American, Hispanic, and so if we were to make assumptions that the people who identified as Hispanic also identified as white, I think we would be reading into the data things that may not be there.
Right.
There is one thing I'd like to clarify too here, and this sort of stems from our our understanding of how administrative data sets work versus how sort of self-reported data sets work, right? In the census, individuals are self-identifying as their own race, their own ethnicity. In an administrative data set, it is often the case that the person who's being identified does not make that determination. And so CDC staff, research staff, we try to put a lot of thought into how we represent those different types of data sets depending on how the information is recorded. For example, in our STOP data set, we put a lot of emphasis on it being perceived race because it's the officer's perception of the person's race, right? And so we think about that a different way than maybe in the census where someone's identifying as they identify their own race and ethnicity. I don't know if for every single person here, they self-identified or maybe an officer perceived their race. I don't know how these recordings happened. So that just complicates it a little bit more, right? Because when we think about someone who maybe identifies as Black and Hispanic, they may select the box Black and Hispanic, but someone who views them, maybe an officer who is involved in the case, arrests them, writes down what their race is, may not check the Hispanic box because what they can visually see is that that person is Black. They may not know that this person identifies as Hispanic also. So there's a little bit of complicating factor there. And I think that this is sort of a learning process too with our agencies and how they report. And this is something we haven't really asked them about yet, but we certainly can in this next reporting year make a point to ask a few of these agencies or as many as we come in contact with over the year, how is this getting recorded? Are these folks identifying themselves? Are officers identifying them? That might help us gain a little clarity on how to best represent this too moving forward.
Well, what I'm concerned about is what we've already concluded or concluded 46.8% are Hispanic. So it feels like, jumps out at you that, the Hispanic folks are being picked on. And when I look above, I don't see that. So, I'm just trying to figure out too, how our representation, is more, I guess, balanced or true, or, I just think it sends perhaps, maybe not, but perhaps a wrong message, just the way we're reporting this. But that's me.
Could we add a sentence to your discussion that explains that we're using the census as the basis for how we account for this data, so that we can utilize it in that way, so people that are reading this have that understanding that we're following the census methodology. And perhaps we can also add a sentence that just mentions that we're using the data that the agencies are providing, and that could include perceived race and ethnicity, and not necessarily this self-identified. And so that those two issues are sort of addressed there for anyone who's interested in this data.
Yeah, I think that would help. Thank you.
Yes, we can certainly add those two sentences. Absolutely.
And by the way, I'm new to the committee, and I'm at the Department of Justice. I specialize actually in the civil side of things: bankruptcy, receiverships, foreclosures, seizures of that sort. And the Department of Justice thought it would be helpful to have that perspective. But I'm not a criminal expert by any means, but just a nerdy guy. So happy to be on the committee.
Thank you, Justin. I'm sorry I skipped over some introductions at the beginning.
Oh, no, that's fine. I just wanted you to know.
So I've got a question related to this data collection, and it may not necessarily be needed right now, but I think at some point in time, is there a way that we can correlate race and ethnicity by the type of drug, realizing that most of these are delivery cases, and some of it will be reflective of where the drugs are coming from, for example, where fentanyl is coming from. So I don't know if that's possible to do that. I don't know if it's necessary right now until there's more data collected.
We can absolutely do that. So when we get these data reported, it is one line that describes all the information we have about the seizures in those tables above, along with all the demographics for all the individuals. And so I would say absolutely we could do that. I would want to wait for maybe 2 years of data so we have a little bit larger cell counts in a table like that, but we could totally take race and ethnicity information or gender information or anything like that and then sort of cross tab it with drug type, especially because we pretty consistently see all of our cases are related to drugs and we do have information on what those drugs are. I think that's totally possible. And I agree it might be more helpful if we waited for a larger data set, but we could absolutely do that in the future.
All right. Any more discussion on this? Catherine, I think we're ready to move forward.
Thank you all very much for that discussion. That was very helpful. We'll make some changes to this section and add some information and get that all to you later. Okay, so moving to dispositions. This first page is identical to the many previous reports. It just basically explains what the distribution amounts are depending on whether a case is civil or criminal and by a state or local agency. This is the main table for the. Yeah.
Could we go back to that? I understand state agency, understand local agency. I don't understand by any agency. Could we have an example, maybe some examples of what that would be?
So really what this is doing is this is a little graphic I put together years ago, which I'm happy to change if it is confusing. It's just what we've been using for a couple of years. But this is just basically supposed to show what so the statute requirements for distributions are dependent on whether a forfeiture is civil or criminal and by a local or state agency. In Oregon, that means by OSP or not by OSP, essentially. And so for the civil forfeitures, it matters whether an agency is local or state and what their distribution requirements are. For criminal forfeiture, it doesn't matter. So any agency just means OSP or any other agency in the state. So this really could be 4 pie charts that say criminal forfeiture by local agency and criminal forfeiture by state agency. They'd just be the same distribution requirements. So this is just sort of a condensed version of what the 4 quadrants of that cross between civil, criminal, and local state would be, just condensed.
That helps because that actually I looked right over the civil and the criminal, so that in itself takes care of it. Thank you.
Of course. No, thank you for clarifying, because if things are unclear, it is absolutely, we can change anything we need to. I did blow past that pretty fast. I apologize.
Catherine, let me just ask the titles that we have here based on what Dick just said.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be beneficial to maybe call out and basically civil forfeiture by state agencies and then either put in parens OSP, or do you think that there's other? I'm trying to think of what other agencies, then it would really come back to the Department of Justice or somebody
DOJ,
like that.
Yeah,
DOJ could.
We haven't for several years, but we can, and we have the ability to. We haven't had a case where it's been appropriate for us to for a while, but
let's just leave it like it is.
Okay. Yes, yes, thank you for that clarification. DOJ can. I would just say I have never seen it. That does not mean it will not happen in the future. And if it does, then they would fall under the state agency designation.
The only other thing, I guess, is the title maybe as local law enforcement agency versus state, or would, if we did that, would that not really preempt out DOJ? I mean, I understand that it's law enforcement component, but
yeah, I don't think that that would exclude DOJ, and I think it might clarify for folks who are just reading this and don't know that. So we could add that.
yeah, I think what Dick was, at least what I was taking away from that is that, you know, what is the agency's by clarifying its law enforcement, that probably focuses people, even though this is asset forfeiture.
Sure, absolutely, we can add that. Okay, so this is probably the biggest, hardest to read table in the report. But I think it actually, as messy as it looks, it is the best way to look at this, because we have those 4 categories, right? Those civil versus criminal cases, and then local and state agencies. And then looking at their total receipts for all these distributions. So this is after a seizure is made, after it's gone through all the court processes it needs to go through, and it's disposed of. This is what the law enforcement agency and sometimes DA's office does with the funds. The funds, or the funds from the items that were seized, and how they get distributed to these required accounts. And so this goes through details of their total receipts, all their costs that they recorded over the case process, their net receipts minus all those costs, and then their total distribution to each of these different funds. And then at the very end of that, net law enforcement proceeds. And so if we look back up here, this is how funds should be distributed. This is not always how funds are distributed. So a few years ago, just as a reminder, if folks don't know that this happened, we had a form that used to take the agency's net receipts, calculate based on these percentages how much should be going into these accounts, and then because we populated those percents based on the receipts, we just put that amount in the report for what had been distributed. That was not always the case, and we had one of the distributions, I can't remember now, maybe the early learning division, anyway, come to us and say, hey, this isn't actually how much money we got. And so we made the decision that it's best to record exactly what was sent, what agencies report to us was sent to these different distributions, and not necessarily the correct amount based on the percentages. So these will not add up perfectly, because we have multiple different agencies putting what they actually sent to each of these distributions into our forms, and we are putting them in this table. So I have a bunch of notes down here at the end of the table that sort of explain that. And then we have some slightly strange cases where agencies are, maybe this criminal case by a local agency they ended up sending $81 to the early learning division when that isn't something they're actually required to do based on the distribution amounts. But AFWAC is tasked with reporting what has happened with these dispositions, not auditing what has happened with these dispositions. So this is what we've been doing for a couple of years. It's just this year it looks like there's more things going on that maybe are a little bit different from what the dispositions are, or the distributions are supposed to be. Just wanted to note that for you all, in case someone later on who reads the report has a question about that. That is the way that staff have determined is most consistent with what AFWAC's task is, which is to accurately report what agencies are telling us happened with these funds. I don't know if anyone has comments on that. We haven't discussed this, I don't think, in detail before, because for the most part, everything seemed very accurate, and that agencies were not necessarily sending things. And we aren't seeing agencies not sending funds to where they should be. It's more that some extra funds seem to be getting distributed to, and it may be a misunderstanding among agencies about what the requirements are. But again, we haven't checked up on each of these individual cases, as our function isn't necessarily to audit.
Are there any huge differences between what the dispositions should be and
I
what's
would-
happening?
I would
Big
say
ranges?
53,000 extra to the specialty court fund is a little odd. We have not looked into that specifically, but I might before we end up publishing this report, because that's not a required distribution, right? So a local agency with a criminal case does not need to distribute any money to the CJC Specialty Court Fund according to the distribution amounts. So I'm not sure what happened there. We probably need to check on that. But these $81, I mean, I don't know. It may be one agency, and like I said, I haven't looked at this. It may be one agency who had one criminal case, one local agency who had one criminal case, who made a mistake about where they're supposed to send money, and they just recorded or reported to us what happened. And maybe, again, it's not really our function to audit them. It is to report what happened. But I guess I would love your all's opinions on whether we should be reaching out to these agencies and asking about that, or whether we just report what has been reported to us.
It would seem to me that we would want to make an inquiry.
Okay.
Because if it's not a required distribution and it was made, then it seems to me something needs to be there to explain it and understand. I think you covered it in the notes as to the double asterisk as to saying that, but that may raise the question for somebody, well, why did that entity get any distribution? And so maybe it would be worth IDing the agency or agencies that may have done these offline distributions to find out, why they did it, what steps, if any, have they taken to, because I mean, the question really comes down to it, is that an appropriate distribution?
Yes. We can absolutely reach out.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that,
mhm.
The whole point of this is so that the public can have faith in the process that the government is not taking people's money unfairly and doing unfair things with it, right? And particularly since that went to a CJC fund and CJC administers the oversight committee.
Yep.
We probably should answer that question. Yeah.
Yes. We will look back into what specific case that came from, what agency it came from, and we'll probably have Angel reach out to them and ask that question.
But it sounds like none of these are underfunded.
Not to our knowledge, no.
Yeah.
It just seems that this may be, I hate to say accidental, but just a misunderstanding of criminal versus civil, maybe case requirement or distribution requirements would be my guess. Okay. I do want to note too that this is a low number of dispositions. Yeah, and this is low funding. So typically our total receipts are, maybe not typically, but 2 to 3 years ago, they were closer to 3 million a year. And so it's just lower. We typically see a lot more. Which lines up with having fewer seizures, of course.
Is that having a significant impact on any of these programs? And if so, should we report that?
I do not know if it is, and it is up to you all what we report. So we could look into that and report that if that's something you believe is important.
I'm going to suggest that we don't do it this year. I think based on what happened in 4002, bringing intent to deliver back in, Hubbard Boyd being addressed, we're probably going to see these numbers bounce back up.
Okay. All right. I want to be conscious of time, so I'm going to run really quickly through the use of proceeds piece. This is the largest number of use of proceeds forms we have ever had reported in a year, which is due to Angel taking a lot of time to contact every single agency she possibly could and explain that this use of proceeds form, almost regardless of whether an agency did seizures, had any dispositions, needs to be filled out once a year. And so we have 47 agencies, which is up from our typical 10 to 15, fill this out this year, which is amazing. And it resulted in a lot of good conversations and us meeting with agencies, staff meeting with agencies, explaining sometimes the whole asset forfeiture reporting requirements. A lot of agencies, really small ones, are ones that don't do seizures a lot of times, just didn't know that this was a reporting requirement. I think there's a lot of turnover in agencies, and folks who fill out these forms may not pass that on to their to the next person in their position, right? So we spent a lot of time reaching out to agencies and just doing our best to educate them about the reporting requirements throughout the year. And this is really what we got as a result, which I think is really exciting, having done this for quite a few years and had very few use of proceeds reports in the past. So thank you to Angel for doing all that work and getting all these folks reporting. But our state totals here for amounts received by these agencies in 2023 due to asset forfeiture is $400,000. I will note that's very different than the $100,000 we see in this table up here. Those two numbers have never matched up perfectly. This year, there is quite a gap there, and my suspicion is there's sort of two potential things going on here. Some agencies that don't know anything about asset forfeiture reporting that we spoke to may have filled out the use of proceeds form, but no disposition forms. So we may have just a lack of reporting to some extent on the disposition form front, or they weren't able to get them completed in time before we pulled the final data for this report between when we discussed with them what the reporting requirements were and then when this report was put together. Agencies may also be conflating federal asset forfeiture accounts and state asset forfeiture accounts and reporting much more money in their use of proceeds form than we would even see if they had perfectly accurate disposition forms filled out. I think that some agencies tend to have more federal forfeiture than state forfeiture, and agencies receive more funds back from federal forfeiture than state forfeiture. So it's very possible that some of these funds they're reporting here maybe federal forfeiture funds. And then again, I will note that these two figures, this 400,000 and 100,000 up here in this other table, have never matched perfectly. And some of that has to do with timing. So you may not get your disposition form filled out at the same rate as what's in your account. And so a little bit of difference there would be expected, but this is kind of a difference. And I suspect it's either the federal forfeiture funds and or folks knowing to fill out the use of proceeds form, but not knowing or not having enough time to fill out all their disposition forms. What they reported spending in 2023 was about $520,000, and then what they reported having in their accounts at the end of 2023 as a balance is about $2.8 million. This is pretty typical. So, like in most reports, if you go back and look, there's a few $1 million statewide sitting in forfeiture accounts, I suppose waiting to support programs. And then here is just a table of items reported purchased using proceeds. Very typical. Lots of equipment for sort of like drug enforcement, a lot of canines, tactical gear, things like that. So this doesn't look very different from many years. And
I don't know what's normal, but I noticed a couple of things that looked a little strange. One, Douglas Interagency Narcotics Team spent $71,000 and they just listed insurance.
Yep.
And I was curious if we could provide more specificity or.
This is exactly what they wrote in the form. So I have typically taken the exact words, phrasing, everything that they report in these forms and put it into this into this table. Medford often gives very detailed, I mean, you can see year over year, like these agencies, South Coast Interagency Narcotics Team does something similar. It's fairly typical for them to say operating expenses. It's not very specific. We could reach out to these folks and ask them to be a little bit more specific in the future. I just do record exactly what they put in the forms.
Okay.
I think that's a good question, because jumping back up to see the use of proceeds, Douglas Hinet had brought in almost $72,000. That's one heck of an insurance policy.
Right.
And they spent every penny of it, which is weird.
Yeah.
Like they brought in exactly what their insurance costs this were going to be.
I hate to say this, Angel, this might be on your list of contacts.
Yeah, this is definitely something Angel can ask questions about for us. She's a wonderful liaison with the agencies, and she's definitely the person to ask these types of questions. I have to say, I did have the same question about these. The only thing, I mean, if they have insurance costs that are over 71,000 a year and they received that many, maybe this went towards their insurance costs but didn't cover it. But you're right, that is indeed one hell of an insurance policy. So it warrants a question.
And maybe we could find out what kind of insurance too, just
Yep.
so that there's a little bit more understanding of why it was so expensive. And then Cottage Grove Police Department, they have capital outlay, and I was just wondering if that was for it is $33,000. They didn't receive any money, but they spent $33,000, and I just was curious, like, can we ask for more specificity, or do we need to ask for more specificity when they just say capital outlay?
So what I would do is, yeah.
Can I pipe in about Cottage Grove?
Please. Please.
So I don't know how much information we can actually get from Cottage Grove, because they just got a new chief. Prior chief did not keep the best books, we'll say.
That's well stated, Angel. Well stated.
So I would say new chief is great, but getting past data gonna be really hard.
I will say that we have met with Cottage Grove at least once, if not twice, and talked about reporting requirements moving forward. So we can certainly reach out and say, hey, I know that maybe this last year it was a little bit tough, but in the future, could we have more descriptive information in your use of proceeds report? And they seem very open to reporting in every way we've discussed with them. So that's something we can mention moving forward with them too.
I wasn't sure about our duties here in terms of whether it matters and whether they're limited in what they can spend money on. But I thought I would note that. And then the final note I just mentioned is in the Oregon State Police publications and interagency team dues is listed twice. So you could take off one of those.
Okay. Yep, we can do that. All right, and that is the end of the report. So please ask any other questions, or we can go back to different pieces of the report now too.
It does raise a question of who is responsible for kind of auditing and kind of keeping, you've already stated we're just reporting, but it does bring to mind, at the end of the day, I guess 400,000 isn't a lot of money, but maybe it is, or it ought to be.
All I can say is I agree. I don't know who is the auditor. I often struggle with that, looking at these forms, right? And so our role is to report exactly what they report to us. I don't know of any other agency or entity that is auditing this information. I really think that AFOAC is the only group who gets this information, who looks at it, and who knows what's going on with it. So I don't know who would be the auditors.
And I also, just comes to mind because I love the new list, because I was astonished as I went back to other years of the report and how many more we're reporting
Yes.
anyway. But I can't help but look at a lack of agencies from the coast and from my district. So I kind of wonder, gee, they don't do anything in this arena. So I don't know what to make of it as I guess as a senator or someone on this committee.
Mm-hmm. I would say that Angel can speak to this too. I mean, we particularly this last 6 months, maybe we have spent a lot of time trying to reach out to agencies and get them to fill out these forms. And it's really hard because it does take a lot of time for them. And so some of the smaller agencies, I think they don't necessarily do any asset forfeiture. It's not something their agency does. It's not part of their policy. It's not something they really even know about. Like administratively, they don't know that they need to report this. And then for some larger agencies, we do get some reports, but you think, well, maybe there's more going on here. But I think that for some larger agencies, large cases end up being federal forfeiture cases, and we don't receive those reports. So I think that there's sort of a pull between some cases are federal instead of state if they're large enough. Some agencies simply don't do this because it does take a lot of resource to do and then to report. And then in the middle, I don't know. We've often asked a lot of the same questions about whether reporting is accurate. There's enough reporting, whether we're capturing everything that's going on or not. I do have to say all the agencies we've reached out to and spoken with, though, are very eager to do it properly and report everything properly. It's just a matter, in some cases, of knowing what's required of them too. And that's sort of a new effort that we've made to really reach out to these folks and ask them, please report this way and ask us any questions you have and make sure that this is all getting recorded. So I'm hoping that effort helps with that. But we haven't spoken to every single agency. So we certainly don't know for sure.
Well, you've mentioned several times now, the possibility that they're doing federal forfeiture. And I know that, yeah, for some agencies, that is a big thing, particularly if they are involved in a task force or with federal officers. And so I'm wondering, and I truly don't know the answer to this question, if we can and require them to report or their federal forfeitures and at least, some basic information on their federal forfeitures as well, or if not, I don't know what our authority is as far as is requiring that. But obviously for this year, that doesn't do much for this report and for the data, but going forward, that may answer a lot of these questions and then fill in a lot of these holes if we see that oh, well, yeah, it doesn't look like this agency is doing a lot, but that's because, they're getting a lot of federal forfeiture money, or it may give us a much broader picture and a better explanation. And I think that, the whole point of all this is for the public to be able to have faith in the process. And if there's a huge part of it that the public can't see, then that's a problem.
That's a great question. I don't know the answer off the top of my head, but if we combed through the statute, we could certainly see what, if any, authority AFWAC has to require reporting of federal cases as well.
Well, the detail, I guess the question really is, how much detail would we need? And what I'm taking away from what Elisha says is basically just information. Did you have any federal asset forfeitures? If so, how many? And maybe some dollar amount without them needing to break it down. Now, clearly, if they have to do some type of reporting on the federal asset forfeitures to, some federal agency, maybe they could just give us copies of whatever they report, but I wouldn't want to make them try to break down everything that we require, as much as just having that information to fill in the blanks or, the holes of why maybe one agency isn't showing up here, but we know they got asset forfeiture money. It turns out it's from the feds. Other
we can
discussions?
certainly look into that.
The only other thing I have that if you go back to the front page of the report, I think there's a date. Shouldn't that be April 24?
It will be. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It is always a challenge because it's technically the 2023 report and we put it out in 2024. But thank you for pointing that out. Yes, we'll make that change. All right, I know that we are at time. I just will really quickly mention a couple of things that we have for next steps, and that will be we are going to make all the edits that you all mentioned and send another draft report to you all as soon as we can. Please send any additional comments to me over email. It is, if you see something, you know, between now and the end of April and you would like it changed, please send that. We're very open to looking into further pieces that we weren't able to get to today. We are going to try to schedule another short virtual meeting to approve the final draft of the report before April 30th. In the past, when we have been unable to do that, we have gone with approval via email, which is not ideal, but it is possible if we're unable to get a short meeting. But we won't be going through the report in the same detail as we did today, so a very short meeting should be possible. We are going to complete construction of the asset forfeiture dashboard before that meeting, that 30-minute meeting, so that hopefully you all can take a look at a draft version of it and okay its publishing at the time that we submit the report. And then finally, we are working with the legislature and the governor's office to fill the remaining 4 positions on this committee. In order to conduct business, we need 6 out of 10 committee members here. We're very sorry that it was such a rush to get everyone to this meeting today. We really, really, really appreciate everyone coming. When we get those 4 additional individuals, hopefully it will not be so rushed and difficult to try and get everyone in the same room. It is a big goal of ours to get those 4 individuals, those 4 positions filled as fast as we possibly can. And I will stop talking. Does anyone else have anything we need to chat about before we end our meeting today?
Yeah, 2 requests. First one is following up on what you just said. Could you send to the members of the legislature the vacant positions so we know who we should be tapping as to which leaderships? So we can help push that dial. And I think the other thing is regarding the new draft that you're going to give to us. If it could be, I'm going to call it redlined, but something that just shows what are the new additions. And if you're doing any subtractions, we can breeze through it pretty quick and shorten the time for everyone commitment for a short meeting.
Yes, we will do that.
All right. Anything else for the good of the order? For CJC staff, thank you all very, very, very much for everything you're doing and keeping us on task. And the report and the draft form looks great. And, you know, with these additions that the members have put forward, I think we'll have a nice piece to put out by April 30th, 2024.
Thank you all very much.
All right. Thanks. Everyone be well.
Good to see everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.